So first week, we're going to go through the introduction and the Python basics. Obviously, we didn't have a class on Monday, so I'm going to try to cram this all in here into the first day. Don't really have a choice, right? At least trying to get you set up with the environment and everything that's inside of there. For the introduction, you come out here, look at the introduction. It's going to walk you through what is Python, why is Python, all of that kind of stuff, okay? Read this, you'll get a better explanation of what's going on and how it goes through there. It wants you to download and install Mu. I don't want you using Mu, I want you to use idle. And I'm going to describe that here in just a little bit, okay? So when the book talks about Mu this, Mu that, don't use Mu, use idle, right? We'll go through here and it will tell you like, here's how you use idle and all that kind of stuff. But we're going to watch me do that here shortly. All right. So how do you install Python? Everybody needs to install this on a laptop. It works on a laptop. I haven't had any issues all semester long. Whether you're Mac, Windows, Linux, it just works. Okay. It's not been an issue. Please don't make it an issue. If you are here for computer science and you have this big fancy IDE and everything else, use whatever IDE you want. You do not have to use idle, but I'm going to teach you idle. And the reason I teach idle is it works for everybody, right? You don't have to go buy some expensive software or use this overly complicated IDE. This is an introduction class. That's the reason we're using idle. Works on every single platform. I can do it on my phone if I wanted to, okay? So installing Python for this class, you click this link. It takes you out here to the latest version. Should be 3.11.1 for this particular semester. You click on the download link. I'm on Windows, so it's immediately going to store it there. I hit save. Click the file. Before I click install now, I have to click this checkbox down at the bottom that says add Python to my path. If you forget that, it's going to make things really complicated later on. All right. If you screw up and didn't check that, uninstall it all, reinstall it back, make sure you put the check mark in. There's ways to go back and do it later. Complicated stuff on YouTube. Don't do that. Just uninstall it, reinstall it, put Python in the path. Okay. Do that. Hit install now up at the top. We give it the permissions. If those of you that are using Windows 11, sometimes you will not have some of the shortcuts that I show you on here. There's a little drop down that says show everything or show all or something like that at the bottom of a right click. So if you right click on a file to open it up in idle, if it doesn't show that option, there's a bottom section there that says show all or show all available. Okay, click that, then it looks exactly like what you're going to see on my screen. I ran into that here recently with some students that have newer laptops. But Mac, Linux, everything works the exact same way. There are like online Python utilities that you can use for this class. I don't recommend that. It works great if you're just testing some code. It does not work well when you start coding projects. Okay, just download it, install it. It's not complicated. All right, so now once you have it installed, you can come over here, type idle. You're going to see idle. Now I have ones for multiple versions because I teach a bunch of different stuff. You should just have this idle for Python 3.11. Okay, you click on that one. That's going to bring up this prompt. This prompt here is called the IDE shell, which means I can type Python code directly in here, and it's an interactive shell. So if I say 2 + 2, it's going to execute and bring me back 4. If I say something like print Jason Zeller, I'll explain all this later. It prints that code back out. Okay. This is not what we're going to interact with all the time. I want you writing what's called script files or .py files, right? So to do that, you go to File, New File. That's going to pop up your script. So this is where you will start your files. This is where you will type all your code. When you get up to it, you will hit run the module. It will output that in this screen over here. Okay. And again, we're going to walk through homework assignment 1. So it's not that hard. If you pay attention today, you don't have any homework for the weekend. All right. So that's the environment. That's how it works. When you save your files, again, it's going to save it as a .py file. Do not save it in the Python 3.11 folder. Create a folder somewhere on your computer. Save your files there. If you start saving files here, it's going to cause major issues down the class. Every year somebody does it. We can't figure out why something's not working. It's because they saved it here and not in another folder. Just create a folder on your desktop. I'm not going to tell you how to do file management. Again, you're adults. I think you know how to use computers. Save it somewhere, please. All right. So that gets us through that. Got your install. Let me go back. I keep clicking on the wrong button here. All right, back to the basics. Got everything installed. Now we're going to go over what is Python, right? So Python itself is a computer programming language, right? There's a lot of programming languages out there. There's C#, there's PHP, there's a ton of different ones out there. Out of all the ones that are out there, Python by far, I don't care what anybody says, is the easiest. Okay. There's people that can code C# all the time and just fly through it. Great. Or C++. Trust me, Python is meant to be very human readable, very easy to read, very easy to troubleshoot, because it gives you lots of errors as to why what's broken kind of thing. Okay. I teach this to high school students. I teach this to middle school students. You guys can pick it up. I assure you, you can. If you struggle in any of this, that doesn't mean that people don't understand what's going on. Just email me, call me. I'll sit down with you. I don't care. All right. So how does this all work? It's going to talk to you about that interactive shell that we did before. That's also called a REPL, which is read, evaluate, print, right? So when I was doing this IDE that I told you before, or idle, I should say, and it brings up this interactive shell. If I say 2 + 2 and hit enter, what it's going to do is read this expression that I put in. It's going to evaluate it, AKA, in this case, do 2 + 2, evaluate it to 4, then print the 4 out. Then it's ready for the next input. That's called a REPL. All right. You can see this explanation here where they're doing this. The 2 + 2 is called an expression, and that is the most basic form of computer programming language there is. Right. So I type something in, it evaluates everything down based on the values that are there, the operators that are used, and it always evaluates down to a single digit or some single value that comes back. All right. If I type in something like just 2 here, then in that case, it evaluates right back to itself and prints back out 2. All right. Errors in this thing, you guys are going to get errors. If I type in a bunch of gibberish here on the screen, it's going to give me some kind of error. And it's going to tell me exactly what line it is. It's going to tell me that, in this case, name error not defined. That's because I tried to print a variable name that doesn't exist in this case. All right. In other words, use this traceback information to troubleshoot stuff. Here's the reason I record these raw and live and not have some, studio recording where my code is always perfect. That doesn't exist. All right. I'm a real coder. I screw up things 20 times during this class. The beauty of me recording that is that you can see how I go about troubleshooting that code so that you can use those same techniques in your own code. All right. That's the reason I do everything live. So we talked about operators. I'm sure you guys remember math operators from some form of math you had between now and when you were in preschool, right? So addition, plus, minus, subtraction. The asterisk is your multiplication. The / is going to be your division. Double ones are going to be your quotient, modulus, and exponent. Remember, higher precedence, lower precedence. Does anybody remember the cute little acronym? PIMDOS, right? So remember, everything, if it's in parentheses, it gets evaluated first, then the next one out, then the next one out, etc. All right. Order of operations, precedence. So as you can see here, zoom in here a little bit so it's easy to see. 2 + 3 × 6, it's going to evaluate what first? 3 × 6, right? So it's going to do this first, then it's going to add the 2, giving us 20. Because we put this in parentheses, it's now going to evaluate that part first, then multiply it by 6. Simple math stuff. Hopefully you guys still remember this kind of stuff. All right. Python is basically fundamentally like grammar, right? So if you think about it like you're typing a sentence, it will evaluate it in such way. If you do really bad grammar, you throw in some weird stuff, AKA don't leave a variable out because it doesn't make sense. It's going to come back and tell you that doesn't make sense, kind of thing. All right. Which brings me back to your homework assignments, spelling, grammar, punctuation. Again, you're all in college now. If you give me lowercase spellings and misspelled words and that kind of stuff, yes, I will count off on that. Again, we're in college, right? Now, I'm not looking for you to be APA cited source here. If just general spelling, grammar, punctuation, capital letters, silly stuff. Okay. Anybody have any questions so far? I know I'm going through it really fast today, but that's because we're trying to cram everything into one day. Go back and watch the videos. That's why the videos are there. All right. In Python, we're going to have several different data types that we're going to cover throughout the semester. All right. There's three main ones that are always going to cover, and those are going to be things that we reference back to throughout the semester. So we have what's known as an integer, we have a floating point, and we have a string data type. So integers are going to be whole numbers, anything from -2, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whole numbers. All right. If it has a decimal point, we call that a floating point. Just means you can have as many decimal points as you want. So -1.25, -1.0 is not the same as -1. It's two totally different things. You have a decimal point, it's now a floating point integer. All right. In coding, those are two separate data types that are in there. So -1.0 is not the same as -1. Anybody have any questions on that? That sometimes trips people up. Okay. Strings are always going to be denoted with single quotes around them. You can also use double quotes around them. Either one is fine. All right. If it's inside of that, it's designated as a string, which you can think of that as usually text, but you can also have numbers inside that string. So for example, 11 cats means that we can't really do any math because we can't do math with letters, right? It's the easiest way to remember that. So if it's in a string, if we want to do math with it, if there's a 4 in there and we want to add it to another string that has a 5 in it, we need to convert each one of those over to integers, then we can do math. Or we need to convert those over to floating points, then we can do math. All right, and I'll show you how to convert those back and forth. All right. If you need to create a single or a blank string, it's just two quotes. So if you need to start with an empty string, you can do that. The beauty of things like Python versus something like C++, you don't have to define something first as to what type it is. Python interprets it right on the fly. So if you use single quotes, hey, it's a string. If you have no decimal point, it's an integer. If it has a decimal point, it's a floating point. It automatically sets those. So some of you coming from other languages, you usually have to define what type those are. This can change all the time. Variable types can change all the time. Anybody have any questions there? Okay. The syntax error down here, if I have a single quote, start to type in hello world, forget my other single quote, I will get a syntax error. More often than not, you just forgot a single quote somewhere. Go back, look at your code, add the quote back in. All right. Now, I said earlier, we can't do math on strings, and we can't do math on strings, but we use the similar operator. So for example, if I have the string of Alice and I want to join that with the string of Bob, I use the plus sign, right? It's the addition operator, but when it's two values, in this case, string values, we are using what's called string concatenation. All right, so we're concatenating or putting together those two strings. Note that the evaluation down here is Alice Bob. There is no space between. So if I want a space between that, I need to add another concatenation of a space here. So single quote, space, single quote, then do plus Bob, then it would actually add that space in there. Or I could put a trailing space off Alice or a trailing space before Bob. Don't encourage you to do that. That'll cause you issues later on. All right. Again, this is string concatenation. I cannot concatenate a string and an integer. I'm going to get an error type, right? Cannot concatenate strings and integers. It even tells you right here, integers and strings. You go back up here and realize it's not, which means you would have to convert this over to a string. Then you could concatenate that together. Am I losing anybody so far? All right. When you're dealing with strings and you want to have multiple of that string, so you don't have to type it out all the time, Like I want Alice written 5 times back to back to back. I can use Alice up here, and I can use the expression of a multiplication number or multiplication sign, asterisk, and then the number of times I want it to do it. So a lot of times it doesn't make sense to do Alice, 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 but it may make sense of I want to build a nice pretty header to whatever program I'm doing, right? Instead of me having to do something like this to build out some kind of header and evaluating that out, I could just do this. Whoops. Throw in that, do an asterisk, and say 20. It's going to print out 20 of those for me. All right. So it's kind of nice if you're formatting and kind of styling stuff out, you can do that multiplication of that first string. Anybody got any questions? All right. You cannot multiply 2 strings together, right? Won't work. You cannot multiply a string and a floating point. It will not work. These are the kind of errors you're going to see. It's going to tell you type errors don't make sense. All right. So we've talked about different kinds of data types. Now we talk about variables. So a variable is, like it says here, it's basically just a box, and I'm going to store something in that box. To do that, I use what's called an assignment operator. So if I'm over here and I use the variable spam equals 5, that means that it is now the integer 5, and I can treat it as such. So 5 plus spam is now going to return me 10. You can think of spam just being a label for the number 5 in this case. I can change that by going spam equals 10. Now, if I do 5 plus spam, I'm going to get 15 back out of it. All right. That's your basic variable that's inside of there. When you do variables, these are handy to store different kind of data types, but stored in a way that makes sense to you. It makes it easier to read and follow. So in this case, like spam equals 40, great, I get that back. I can say eggs equal 2, then I can say spam plus eggs equals 42, right? If any of you know Monty Python, this text is going to have a lot of reference back to Monty Python, all right? Just let it go. They got to have something there. All right. When you get into here, you can do strings. So spam equals hello, spam equals goodbye. Every time I do a spam equals something, I am not changing what spam was. I'm actually reassigning it entirely. All right. So I'm completely overriding whatever that variable was before. So if earlier in the code, I said spam was equal to hello, later in the code, I say spam equals goodbye. From there on out in the program, it is goodbye. Python reads from the top down. So as it goes through your code, line by line by line, it's going to execute all the way through there. Anybody got any questions on that? Yeah. Yes, because those are all different labels, right? So if I have the word spam 1, spam 2, and send them all to different things, absolutely, those are different assignments. You just can't reuse the same variable name unless you're going to override it. Great question. Thank you. All right. So these are just illustrations of what I'm talking about. You throw out hello, you're putting in goodbye. That's what it's going to get stored as. Variable names, there are some rules to what you can use for a variable name. Just know in this class, you should have all variable names with lowercase letters, right? So don't start with a capital letter S for spam. That's reserved for classes and some other stuff down the road. You're going to get some funky errors and stuff like that later on in the class. Just be in the habit of doing lowercase letters. So you can do lowercase underscore something else. So if you want current underscore balance, that's completely valid. You cannot use hyphens. You can use underscores, not hyphens. You can use camel case, which is pretty common, where it starts with a lowercase and then the second part of that is a capital B. That's pretty common in Python. All right. It cannot begin with a number, but it can have a number later after characters. So you can have a count 4, but you cannot have 4 count. You can start with an underscore and then have whatever variable title you want, but you cannot just have a number, because then that becomes a what? Anybody remember the 3 data types now? Integer, right? So you can't assign a variable name of 42. You would have to underscore 42, so it becomes that variable. You could do all caps. That's fine. But you don't want to start with a capital letter and lowercase. Python will accept it, but it's going to cause you problems later down the road. All right. And you can do all lowercase letters. You cannot use things like single quotes, because if I use something like this, it's a what? String, right? All right. Anybody got any questions there? Now, this is the part that trips a lot of students up. If I have something like spam equals 32, remember I said don't do that. Python will accept it and I can use it. It will be 32. If I have lowercase spam is equal to 5, note that spam is still 5, but capital S spam is still 32, which means Python code is case sensitive. And this throws people off. If it is not exactly the case sensitive part that it is, like you turn it in a homework assignment, I say use this variable, you throw a capital letter in there, guess what? That's a whole different variable. It's not me being picky about spelling and capitalization. It's not even the same variable. It's different. It's Python. So everything is case sensitive. Make sure what you're using in your code, you keep that in mind. All right. The name or the whatever you give the variable should be some kind of meaningful, right? So if we're storing a variable that is your age, what would probably be a good variable title? Age, right? Don't put unicorn, because then it's going to be hard to understand it. Will it work? Absolutely, it'll work. But you're going to lose track of what unicorn meant further down the road. Some people try to be super simple with their variable names, and then they get lost as to what they said it. Just make it what you're trying to call it. It's the whole point of it. Whatever you do, just keep consistency on the way you do that. All right. So throughout your program, there's a thing called PEP 8 compliance, which is Python code. If you guys were going to become full-on Python engineers and programmers, then you would want to start off making sure that you're doing PEP 8 compliance, right? The idea is if you're going to do all variable names with all lowercase, or maybe you're going to use camel case, then just do that throughout your project. It's a good habit to get into. All right. We're not necessarily running out of time, but I'm running out of battery because I forgot my power supply today. So forgive me on that. We're going to get through this last little section. The first program that you're going to go through there, it's going to have you print this kind of stuff out and do that in the interactive shell. We want to do this inside of our script, right? So we're going to start over here. We're going to go to File and New. What's the first thing I do on my homework assignment? Anybody remember? Copy and paste the initial comments. Great. So we come back out here to the class, go back out here to learning modules, just come down here, copy and paste this in. So we take this, copy and paste that in. Note that it has to have those pound signs in the beginning. That denotes this as a comment, so it's not going to execute that code. If you don't put it in, you're going to get a bunch of errors. All right. So this one would be assignment 1. We need to put your name here. Again, this will be something like Jane Doe. Great. Now you've got that part. Okay. Then from your script on, we're going to do a couple things here. So the first thing we're going to do is use what's called the print function. Print function is going to allow you to spit that information back to the user. Print is your friend. If you don't know what that variable is at that point in the program, just print it out to the screen. You're going to use print a lot to debug your code, and that's perfectly fine. Clean that up before you turn in your homework assignments and only use print statements where I say, but use print to debug everything that you're doing. So I'm going to say print, and I'm going to say hello and welcome to my program. Okay. No, I use double quotes here. You're going to see me use double quotes and single quotes interchangeably. And I will explain further in the class why you would use one over the other. I recommend you use double quotes. The reason for that is if I say, hello, this is Jason's program, right? And I use single quotes on everything. Notice how we have a weird green thing happen out in the middle, right? It's the other beauty of Python. If it's a function, it shows up in purple. If it's a string, it's going to show up in green. If you use an integer or a floating point, it's going to show up in black. So it's trying to tell you that something's here. So we'll notice that this last little part of Jason's program went black on us. That's because it takes this apostrophe and thinks it's a single quote, right? So we would have to escape that. We'd have to do something goofy. It's a whole lot easier just to come in here and use double quotes. Then if we use apostrophes in the middle, it doesn't matter. It ignores that and treats it as what we intend it to be. So this program is going to say print, hello, this is Jason's program. Then we want to gather something from the user. We're going to use something called the input command, right? We usually want to assign that to some variable. That way, if we gather something from the user, it stores it. If we just type in input and we say, what is your age? Right? They're going to type that in. We hit enter. Nothing happens with what they typed in. We didn't store what they typed in. It just takes the input from the user. So we want to assign that to some variable. There again, what would be a good variable name for this one? Age, right? So age equals our input. Note up here, this is just going to print it to the screen. We can also put this inside of a print statement. That's going to do it in line. And I'm going to show an example of that here in a minute. If you do these, it's best to put a space at the end and some kind of prompt, right? So that it looks nice and clean inside your project. All right, so I got their age. We can come back and we can say, Jason said he was, all right, we're going to do this. And then we're going to say plus whatever age was. Does anybody remember what this is doing? The term for that, where we're taking two strings and putting them together? String concatenation, all right? That's different than string replication, which is where I would use the multiplication sign and have the number 5. So understand string replication, understand string concatenation. It's on a quiz, figure it out, all right? This is going to post that together. Really short program. We go ahead and run this. I need to save it before I can do it. Remember, I know I'm running out of battery fast here. If we go to our documents, store it wherever you want. I'm going to say this is example 1. Okay, I got an example folder. How about example 1? There we go. Notice our program executes and it comes down here. At this point, because I used an input, it's going to sit there and flash on the screen and give you that prompt for you to type something in. So instead of me doing space this prompt, let's do this with a space in it, rerun it. Notice how it's much easier to type and it makes it a little cleaner. So just format that to make it nice and easy to read. All right. Does anybody else notice what I did in this program? Not grammarly correct, right? I forgot a punctuation up here. There you go. Throw a punctuation in. Okay. So we have this. What is your age? Notice that this printed it out on the line. The input allowed me to do it online or in line of there. I don't recommend doing a whole lot of inlines. I can see you doing like a prompt, but I don't recommend that you do a whole lot of inline stuff. It can make it a little confusing for the user when it gets stretched out in bigger programs. So just print that question out first. Copy and paste this in. And now when they execute this, you're going to see it puts it on the line below it. And that way they can type it in. So if I type in 44, I'm not 44, but it says I'm 44, it prints that back out to us. Notice what it did was take this string of Jason said he was this, and then we concatenated whatever we typed in there at the end. Any input that a user types in, at this point, it's a string. So we are not taking in 44 as a number. We're taking 44 in as a string. So age is a string at this point. If I wanted to calculate and do some math, then I would need to convert that over to an integer. So to do that, I would say something like this. I have my age, and I'm going to say int age, which converts it over to an integer, plus 4. So I can say something like this, where age equals int age plus 4, or we can call this new age because we don't want to overwrite it. So my new age is the integer of whatever I typed in plus 4, and I can print that out. So we're print in 4 years, you will be, and then I can come over here and do plus, and I can say new age. Oops, don't need that quote. Put that in there. So if we run this and I type in 44 here now, I'm going to get an error. The reason I get this error is we converted this over to an integer so we could do math. We have to convert it back to a string to do concatenation. So that means I got to come over here and use str, wrap new age in str, which means convert it to a string. Then I can concatenate those two together. Now, if I say 44, it added 4 to that and string that back out. Everybody kind of see how that works? All right. My battery's dying really fast here, right? So for the homework assignment that you get down here at the bottom, let's look at this real quick. I encourage you to go back and watch the old video. It'll be available there. At the bottom of everything, you're going to see this old videos folder. That is where you can go back and watch previous videos. Okay. The newer video should always be up here at the top where you can actually see what's there. And that'll be the current semester. I will go through each one of those and remove it. Obviously, you won't see that till after Monday's class, right? Because I record the new one on Monday. I upload it right after class. Then you would see it immediately after class. Because this class is at 9 in the morning, as soon as we get out of here, I submit the recordings and they're live on Blackboard. Right? It takes about an hour for it to upload and do all its things, but it should be available within an hour after class. If you look at this homework assignment down here at the bottom, and the old video will show you this really quickly. I encourage you to copy and paste this into your homework assignment so that you don't have to flip back and forth and remember all the requirements. So if I paste this, just remember to put that hashtag in the front, which means that this is a comment. If you don't, you try to execute your code, it's going to fail. So really easily, you get 1 point just for putting your name on the paper. All right. Put the comments at the top, really easy. Then it says use the print function to display some welcome and prompt a question to the user. Okay, well, I have this. This is my welcome. This is my prompt for whatever the question we're wanting to ask. All right. That means I should not say, what is your age on the input line? Because I specifically asked you to use the print function to do it. All right. So these 2 points, boom, here's my program. What's my age? I gather that input. Then I say use the input to store a variable called my input. Well, yes, this is age, but I specifically asked you to call it my input. Notice that there's a capital I there. So when I'm grading your homework project, use the variable my input. All right. I told you right here, if you go back and look at this, it's italicized here, telling you specifically, make sure you use my input. All right. Then it says use the print function to print the contents of that out. That doesn't mean just print and then throw the variable in there, right? We actually want you to do something like this, where it said Jason was blah. Okay. I want you to interact with string concatenation, which, by the way, is the last point you get here is 2 points. So just by doing the homework assignment, a lot of these points are automatically counted for. All right. The last point here is I want you to use 2 different math operators from that table 1-1, which means you need to do addition, you need to do a subtraction, you can do multiplication, whatever you want to do, but find some way to do something with that. So this little quick project I did here, this counts as one of them. I added 4 to it. I could go and subtract 10 and you could come back and say 10 years ago you were blah. That is your simple first homework assignment. All right. Anybody have any questions on that first homework assignment? You can do whatever you want. You don't have to ask for a name or an age or whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. If you're a Star Wars guy and you want to throw some Star Wars stuff in there, be my guest. Or you're reading some book and you want to build something out, this is your flexibility. Notice I don't tell you what to do here. I just tell you what I want to see in the project. Now, the reason I say that, have fun with those projects. And even if it's just a basic homework assignment, have some fun with it, because as you figure that out, you're going to be setting yourself up for your midterm project. Meaning the more creative you flex on some of these homework assignments you get, the easier it is to come up with a project for your midterm project. So can you copy and paste what I did here and get points for the homework assignment? Yes, except you're going to miss 1 point because you don't have a second math